I call the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to join the debate on the Building Construction Industry Improving Productivity Bill 2013 number 2, as I did on the 2nd of December 2013 in this place. And I rise today for the same reasons I spoke then, because I am critically concerned about the measures in this bill, about the draconian measures and the impact that they will have on civil liberties in this country. I'm also concerned, critically concerned, about the impact it will have on safety, on justice and on fairness, Deputy Speaker, because this bill includes measures that impact or remove a person's right to silence in an interview with this Commission. It also impacts on right of entry for unions. It has extraordinary impact and is designed specifically to limit the union's capacity, a union's capacity, to work with their workers and ensure safety and ensure that in the building and construction industry, workers are not exploited or put at risk. And Deputy Speaker, I say I rose on the 2nd of December, and I went back and had a look at my speech that day, and one of the things that I had mentioned that day was of course, as I'm sure others have today, how dangerous this industry is for workers. And I know that I mentioned that day that as a mother I was critically concerned, as I am today. And to follow up on the previous speaker's notions in terms of, we had a wide-ranging speech that went to lots of areas, many of them not specific to this bill, I might add. But one of the things he talked about was a unionised versus a non-unionised site. And I'd say in this place that as a parent, I would much prefer to know that my child was going to a unionised site. And I say that as a parent who has had young men in the building and construction industries and have had them come home from non-unionised sites with some very hairy stories about their safety being put at risk. And of course, sometimes young people are brave. Sometimes young people with a strong work ethic are prepared to get the job done and to take risks that they shouldn't take. We have laws in this country around OH&S to protect those young people, sometimes from themselves, but certainly to protect them from an exploitative boss or business that wants the job done in a manner that it can't be done under our laws, Deputy Speaker, and I want to make that point. And I also want to make the point that I was shocked this morning to go to look up at the number of Australian workers who've been killed at work in 2015. The numbers from 2015 shocked me, but the number that shocked me most was that as at 19th of January 2016, that is 3 weeks into the new year, 8 Australian workers have lost their lives at work. 8 Australian workers in a 3-week period. And when I went back to look at the total deaths at work in 2015, the number is a staggering 186 lives lost at work. And if I go to construction, the deaths in 2015 total 25. So I say here in all sincerity, after listening to speakers talk about the costs in the building industry, what price those 25 lives? What price people coming home from work, from a day at work, Deputy Speaker? Because that's what comes at the core of this bill. This bill is about reintroducing something that did not do what those opposite claimed it did when it put it in place. But I'll tell you what it did do. It did breach what most Australians consider to be fairness. And that goes to this notion of a right to silence. And we all know the stories. We know the stories well, that you could be pulled in off the street because a person in the Sydney Morning Herald, 15th of December 2007 report, he was walking past a building site not even employed on the building site, pulled in to the Commission to answer questions without a right to silence, without a right to tell anybody that that had occurred to him. Now, this is draconian, and there's no one on the other side of the House that can say that it isn't. This is a breach of what we consider in this country to be fair. Deputy Speaker, I stand at Australia Day and at citizenship ceremonies across the year, and I'm always struck by the notion of our strong democracy, by the faces of those who were taking their pledge that day to respect the rule of law, to respect the civil liberties in this country. And then I come to this place to find a piece of legislation that trashes those civil liberties, and hear person after person try and justify that in this place. In what we're hearing in the threads is, well, one, we've got salacious smear of the industry and of the union. On the other, we've got an argument about productivity that doesn't bear in mind the safety of the workers, doesn't bear in mind those 25 lives lost last year. And, Deputy Speaker, the right to silence is really, really important in this. Now, we've had a wide-ranging debate today, but the debate actually started this morning out the front, talking to the press. The member for Braddon fronted the press this morning at the doors and went out and made a huge declaration suggesting that no one from the Labor Party wanted to come out and talk about the ABCC this morning. Deputy Speaker, he went on to use the quotes that have been used in here, the smears, the testimony, uncontested testimony and quotes from a Royal Commission. He went on to quote those. And then when asked by a journalist what he thought about what it meant for the right to silence and how that stacked up against the Liberal principles, he didn't answer the question. He went back to talking about the Royal Commission, not the legislation. The journalist pulled him up again. His response was, "I haven't really paid a lot of attention to that." Now, Deputy Speaker, I would argue that that goes to the very point. I haven't paid a lot of attention to that. To what? To the measures in the bill? No, the conversation at the doors was all about a Royal Commission. It was all about the smear. Couldn't go to a critical element of the bill because the obsession, the ideology that's happening, rather than the common sense approach that should be taken here, that Labor has already made announcements about making sure those things happen. And I noted it fascinated me, the challenge of no Labor MP wants to come out and talk about the ABCC this morning. No, because we're in here talking about it, member for Braddon, like we were in 2013. In fact, in 2013, 50% of the Labor members stood up and talked about this piece of legislation, while only 38% of those members opposite stood up and talked about this legislation or argued for this legislation. And I note, for the record, that neither the member for Lyons, the member for Bass, nor the member for Braddon were amongst those from those speakers opposite. They weren't interested in the legislation then. They're not interested in the legislation now. They're very interested in salacious smears by quoting the Royal Commission. That seems to me, Deputy Speaker, what this is really about. Goes to the heart. On this side of the chamber, we want to have a serious conversation about the future of work in this country. We want to have a serious conversation about the provisions that need to be put in place to protect workers. We want to have a serious conversation about things that were thrown out by the Royal Commission. On this side of the chamber, we want to see corruption wherever it appears dealt with. On this side of the chamber, we want to see all of the findings from the Royal Commission and to have those referred for criminal charges where there's been criminal activity. And then let's talk about this somewhere down the track, because, of course, we all know that the previous Royal Commission threw up all sorts of smears that resulted in not one criminal conviction. If I was a betting man and not a non-betting woman, I might ring someone and place some money on what we're going to get at the end of this long, slow train. Yeah, good, because I would ask this question in this chamber. We've had line after line after line of smear. We've had two former Prime Ministers dragged in front of this Royal Commission so that we can have some guff to say at the doors, some salacious smearing to use in this argument, because you can't do it with logic, because you won't convince the Australian public that we need to take away workers' rights to be safe. You won't convince the Australian public of that, and you won't convince them by quoting your report that you want to quote about how good the ABCC was for productivity, because it has been smashed. It has been smashed. It has been completely discredited years ago, and yet you continue to walk through the doors and quote it in here. This is the heart of our democracy. This debate is about the future Australia that we want to see. This debate is about how we are going to treat our fellow citizens in the workplace into the future. And what this government is proposing is to segregate one sector of the workforce and create different laws for them. Create different laws for those who work in construction. In this country, in our country, a country where at every citizenship ceremony we talk about the strength of our democracy. Deputy Speaker, if it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. So the case for this has been built on the most recent Royal Commission and the Cole Commission. Nobody is coming in here from the other side to argue why we should reduce a union's ability to ensure that OH&S happens in every workplace in this country. No one from the other side has come in to argue how we should ensure that every worker is paid a fair day's pay. What we are hearing is a lot of rhetoric about how we need to be able to build things cheaper. So I would ask again, what price those 25 lives? And Deputy Speaker, the union movement as a movement, these rights have been built up through a strong history of workers working together in a collaborative, collective way to mount the case to make our workplaces safer, to ensure that our workers are paid a fair wage. That's what this argument's about. So when I hear productivity, like a lot of Australians, what I'm actually hearing is we want cheap labour. So unlike those opposite, we have put together on this side of the House a package of reforms that will ensure that criminal conduct is detected at the earliest opportunity and dealt with by the full force of the law. That's not what's in this bill today. Core to our plan is making the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, with its coercive powers, the regulator of the most serious contraventions of the Registered Organisations Act. On this side, we have people prepared to get the work done. On that side, we have an ideological war being driven by a need and a want to revert to a Howard-era piece of legislation, Deputy Speaker. Labor's put together a package that will ensure that the future would be different for Australian workers, and that where practices are in breach of the law, that they be rubbed out. The General Manager of the Fair Work Commission will continue its role as the regulator, with its current powers to conduct investigations and inquiries and resolve minor compliance issues. It will receive an additional $4.5 million for increased monitoring of registered organisations. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty. Let's fund the monitor to ensure that the right thing's happening. We will extend current electoral funding laws to donations and expenditure relating to all elections managed by the Australian Electoral Commission, such as those for union elections. Real action to ensure that workers who are members of a union are members of a union doing the right thing. In line with our long-standing commitment to greater transparency, Labor will also reduce the disclosure threshold for political donations from $13,000 to $1,000. Labor will also protect and encourage whistleblowers by extending the protections that exist in the public sector to the private sector, registering organisations and the not-for-profit sector. Real action, real ideas on this side about ensuring that if there is illegal activity going on, that gets cleaned up. A shortened Labor government will double the maximum penalties for all criminal offences under the Fair Work Registered Organisations Act. Deputy Speaker, there is no doubt in my mind, that this legislation is about demonising the union movement and demonising their political opponents. On this side of the House, we will oppose it.
Member for Law.